Good morning. Welcome to my talk. This is a people-first approach to running effective meetings. Thank you so much for coming. I guess there's going to be some folks trickling in because I think that the little break just wrapped up, but I'm going to get started. All right. Whoops, I pressed the wrong button. Cool. So first, I'm going to introduce myself. Hello, I'm Michelle. I'm a game designer, a game director, and a bit of a communication nerd. I previously worked as the game director and studio head for Banana Bird Studios on Beasts of Maravilla Island, along with leading and designing on a few other indie projects, both tabletop and digital. I also worked as a designer in tech for a bit, and I most recently worked at a AAA game studio for a few years. And now I'm spinning up a new consulting and design business called Sun Ghost Studio. So a bit of indie, a bit of tech, a bit of AAA, and a whole lot of meetings. So why am I doing this? Well, meetings get a bit of a bad reputation. I know we've all seen those "this could have been an email" memes. But this reputation is not entirely undeserved. When not run properly, meetings can create more confusion, more tension, and frustration. So some issues that might feel familiar would be things like, oops, it's not doing my thing. Well, whatever, that's fine. It normally comes in, but consistent miscommunication or misunderstandings, some attendees never getting the chance to speak up or participate, one or two voices dominating the conversation, or worst of all, attendees feeling like it was a waste of time. Maybe they don't even know why they were there to begin with or why the meeting was held. And the thing is, putting big creative personalities from all different backgrounds together will inevitably result in some social friction, and that's okay. We just need to know how to work with that. So I have a bit of a secret though, which is that I love meetings. And I've been lucky enough to be told that I run a pretty good design meeting. Like I said earlier, I'm a bit of a nerd who reads lots about psychology, communication, and relationship dynamics, and I love the social puzzle solving of creating an environment where I can empower my attendees to be their best selves. So I wanted to share the strategies that I found worked well for running games meetings. Now, none of this information is new. It's built on solid, proven strategies of communication and collaboration. So if any of this comes off as common sense to you, congratulations, you're doing it right. And while most of these tips are absolutely most honed in a design meeting context, I have used them successfully when running departmental meetings or when running meetings with specific disciplines like art or audio. And I hope that these can help you and all of your teams have more meetings that are engaging, productive, and meaningful. So let's change how we think about meetings. I believe that meetings are fragile, beautiful, living things that require tending and care. And if we give them that care, then we can help our meetings and our teammates thrive. So I'm here to share 7 key tactics that I personally use to run meetings that encourage a psychologically safe environment that get the best out of my attendees. And I hope that they'll help you too. But before we move on, you might be asking, Michelle, what is psychological safety? Well, psychological safety is a shared belief held by members of a team that it is okay to take risks, to express their ideas, to speak up with questions, and to admit mistakes, all without fear of negative consequences. And so these consequences are not just punitive actions, they are interpersonal fears. These are things like being judged or criticized or being made to feel stupid, being dismissed or ignored, getting interrupted, or feeling like what they say doesn't matter. And we all want to be liked and respected. And in some environments, we may feel that contributing to the conversation could jeopardize that. So each of these points I'm going to cover are directly working towards forging a psychologically safe environment for your team so you can get the most out of your people. So let's get started with tip number 1, which is to choose a meeting runner. So when we don't have a meeting runner, it's going to work, there we go, things can get off topic without being able to steer back. There's no one to moderate disagreements. People can lose track of time and fail to reach the meeting's goals, and there's no one to advocate for attendees. So please pick a meeting runner. This can be a lead, a producer, or a feature owner. It can be anybody, but having someone to help steer the ship is key for ensuring a focused and meaningful meeting. Meeting runners help keep things moving. They maintain what I like to call conversational momentum, which means that the meeting never comes to a screeching halt for any reasons. That we're flowing, we're vibing, we're expressing ideas, we're thinking, we're laughing, all of that good stuff. And this is key for keeping people engaged during the meeting and keeping people from going on their phones or disengaging from the discussion. We brought them here for a reason, so let's be respectful of their time and maximize it. But of course, silence is fine. It can be great to have silence during meetings even. Let people have a moment to percolate and sit on the thoughts before they contribute. But the silence should be intentional. Have a topic or a segue at the ready to keep the momentum going afterwards. Meeting runners can also advocate and mediate for your attendees. They can mediate conflict if things are getting spicy, they can bridge the gap between attendees that are having trouble seeing eye to eye, and they can help ensure that people are paying attention, staying respectful, and being kind to each other. Plus, a consistent meeting runner can get to know your team's unique needs. They'll know how to mediate conflict or empower their teams in the way that best suits them, and can address areas that need special attention, like if a particular group is prone to getting off topic, or if a particular group has trouble speaking up. So how does having a meeting runner help psychological safety? Well, it can create trust that the meeting room is a safe environment that values candor, creativity, and respect, because someone will be upholding it. It also creates trust that discussions will be mediated fairly, which creates safety to disagree. It also creates trust that meetings will respect the attendees' time and have effective output, encouraging more attendee input. And the meeting runner is instrumental for the implementation of the remainder of my points, so please have one. Okay, so we have a meeting runner now, but maybe we don't have a clear sense of what we're trying to do, which leads me to tip number 2, which is to establish clear goals. So, quick question for the audience, which is how many of you have been in a meeting where you have no idea what you're trying to accomplish? All right, yeah, me too. So, y'all, what are we doing here? What are we trying to solve in this meeting right now? Are we ideating on a new quest? Are we planning our tasks for the next deadline? Are we giving feedback on a new system? This seems like a no-brainer, but you gotta know what you want out of this meeting. Why bring all of these people together and spend an hour not accomplishing anything? So, what is the problem without having clear goals? Well, it means that the meeting can easily go off on a tangent, it can fail to get the perspectives of key stakeholders, and unfortunately, it can sometimes feel like a confusing waste of time. So, how do we solve this? Well, we can create clear goals and clear metrics for their completion. This means making an agenda and getting as close to solving these problems before the meeting ends as you can. And if I have a whiteboard, I like to write the goals or key questions on the board to check against throughout the meeting. And this is a great way to keep people engaged with the key topics as well. And so, and the art of good agendas has enough material for its own talk, but some quick tips for prepping a good agenda, which is you can establish the meeting owner and the key presenters of the meeting, identify who really needs to be there, make sure any materials like prototypes or docs are ready to review beforehand. Share pre-reading so attendees are best equipped to contribute when they arrive. And of course, know what you are trying to solve. So here's a little example of a sample agenda for a meeting about adding a photo mode to a game. So if this meeting was an hour long, we could do our intro for 5 minutes to refresh and align on the goals of what this feature is, then have a discussion portion for about 35 minutes to brainstorm and collate our top 5 favorite ideas, and then a 10-minute wrap-up to determine the next steps for prototypes on those chosen ideas, and then about 5 minutes for buffer time. Take a quick sip of water. Oops, sorry. And then the next thing, to stick to your agenda, time box your topics. This helps us stay focused and gets to all of the issues in the meeting that need addressing. Don't be afraid, as the meeting runner, to interrupt and to get things back on track. You can say something like, these are really great ideas, and we've taken them down to discuss in a breakout later, but let's get back to the topic of conversation. Speaking of which, did a new important topic come up? Have a breakout meeting. It's great when new things are identified to be solved, but instead of hashing it out in this meeting, schedule a more focused breakout meeting to meaningfully solve it, while being respectful of the time in the current meeting that you're in. So, how does this help psychological safety? Well, clear goals help attendees feel confident that their contributions are relevant to the discussion, and thus will be received well, and it removes some of that fear of those consequences that we talked about earlier. And people know why they're there. You can have the stakeholders that feel the most empowered to speak on the issue, which allows for lean and mean meetings with greater authenticity. So now we have clear goals, but maybe the energy is low or people aren't opening up, which leads me to tip number 3, which is to lighten up. Making games is really playful, and yet sometimes meetings can get so intense. I don't know about you, but when everyone is dour or tense, it's not easy to think about how to craft playful or exciting experiences for our players. And I'm not trying to suggest that we shouldn't take things seriously. Conversations should be taken seriously, but we are making games after all. Let's try our best to remember to have some fun and remember the spirit of the craft that we do. Oops, I didn't advance to this one. So how do we solve this? First is that chit-chat is actually good. Chit-chatting for a couple minutes at the beginning of the meeting is not a waste of time. It primes everyone to bring joy and enthusiasm into the creative meeting. You can include it, whether implicitly or explicitly, as part of your meeting structure. Don't force it, but create the invitation to share thoughts, feelings, vibes, and reserve the first 5 minutes or so of your meeting for doing that. And as a runner, you can model this behavior. Be light, share something cool you learned or saw recently, a game you've been playing, and even a small amount of this kind of sincerity and showing your humanity of who you are outside of work can help others want to share it too. And if no one's feeling it, that's cool. You can just move along with the topic at hand, but I'd encourage you to give it a try. The next thing, too, is that with remote meetings, we have lots of fun opportunities for levity. Things like emoji reacts, soundboards, and fun backgrounds can add a sense of playfulness in an easy way while you are having a design meeting. So how does lightening up help psychological safety? Well, it creates an early opportunity to get all of the voices in the room talking, which can create a better foundation for all of those voices to speak up during the meeting. And things like laughing together encourages authentic and honest expression amongst the group. Plus, making space for levity and chit-chatting allows people to show up to the meeting as a person instead of just as their role. It humanizes us, and it encourages engaging with people as humans instead of just as workers. And this creates compassion and empathy amongst each other. So, we've lightened the energy, but what if only a few people are participating? This leads me to tip number 4, which is to create space for everyone. I have another question for the audience, which is how many of you have ever felt uncomfortable or afraid to speak in a meeting before? Me too, yeah. So, if someone's in your meeting, you probably want their perspective, right? And there are so many reasons why someone may not want to talk in a meeting, and it's very likely not that they have nothing to say. So why does this happen? Maybe their manager is in the room, or they're the most junior person in that meeting, or they're newer to game development. Maybe they don't know why they were invited and don't have a clear sense of what they can contribute, or they're just really shy. But a big part is, unfortunately, systemic issues and prejudice that create a difficult environment for some voices to be heard. Being a gender minority, being a racial minority, queer, disabled, or even being a particular age can create these kinds of difficult dynamics. I have been the young woman in the design meeting, and it's scary. It can feel like not only you're trying to put forth your creative ideas, but you're being judged on the basis of your identity when you carve out the space to contribute. It makes participating require a lot more courage and social grit, which can be a lot of work that reasonably not everybody wants to do. So what problems does this create? Well, it can cause many incredibly talented people to stay quiet. Not because they don't have things to say, but because it doesn't feel like they have the space to do so or an audience that will listen. And this means that we're losing out on tons of great ideas and perspectives, which comes at a cost to the games that we're making. And even if you have a team full of great, friendly people, these patterns run deep and these dynamics can happen unintentionally. So, how do we solve this? First, you can notice the patterns. Who's speaking in your meeting? Who's not speaking in your meeting? Are people talking over each other? Are people interrupting each other? Are the same attendees not talking every time? And paying mind to these patterns can help you better address them in the future. Next, we can invite and include others into the conversation. See if you can create runways for quiet people to contribute. Bring up something that they have an informed answer on. We don't want to put them on the spot, but you can carve out some space and give them an invitation. Something like, I just finished up the level into that area, and I know Michelle's been adding new gameplay that might be relevant. Do you have anything you'd like to add? And this way you've given them a specific runway, but they can also say, oh no thanks, I think you've covered all of it. We can also advocate for each other. Don't be afraid to call out when you see a peer get interrupted. kindly say something like, I don't think they got to finish their thought. Can we please go back to that? And as a runner, if one or two people are taking up all of the space in the meeting and making it hard for others to contribute, you can kindly intervene and redirect the energy, because we want everyone's perspective. You can say something like, I just want to pause for a minute to make sure I can get Michelle's thoughts before we move on to that next topic. And then we can find systems that uniquely work for our team. Perhaps you encourage a system of raising hands when the meeting gets to a certain size. Perhaps you use something like a Jamboard, where people can anonymously write ideas and you can go through them together as a team. Perhaps you quickly check in with people who haven't spoken before you move on to a new topic. Excuse me. You can say something like, I just want to make sure before we move on. Michelle, do you have any feedback or thoughts that you'd like to share? And remote meetings have the benefit of a chat box. This can often feel like a safer place for shy voices to contribute. So make sure to look at this and to create structures around addressing the things that pop up there so you can get those quieter voices in the conversation. So how does this help psychological safety? Well, when people's voices feel valued, it makes it easier to contribute in the future without that fear of consequences. And when we carve out spaces for others to speak, it makes it easier for more voices, no matter how shy, to contribute in the future. And when it feels like everyone got to collaborate, it creates a stronger sense of team collaboration and camaraderie, which in turn makes it feel safer for everyone to speak up in the future. All right, so we created structures so everyone can participate. But what if folks still aren't really contributing? Well, that brings me to tip number 5. Which is that your actions are your culture. Take another quick sip of water, because this is a meaty one. All right, so what is the problem here? Well, whether intentional or not, how we listen and how we respond to creative ideas in meetings has a huge impact on the culture of creative collaboration in your meeting and in your entire studio. Demonstrating a lack of empathy to a peer in front of other peers, such as if two teammates are being condescending to each other, or if someone is quick to shut down ideas, can make the environment feel hostile to other new ideas. When we don't listen, it creates miscommunications, which creates tension, which creates a meeting environment that can feel hostile. And when we don't feel heard, it can make one feel like their contributions are not valued and less inclined to participate in the future. So, how do we solve this? I didn't click it, haha, sorry if you want to take a picture. So to begin, it can be useful to ask yourself, how would I want my idea to be received? Would it make me feel awesome if my peers asked me questions about it, or affirmed that it was interesting, or added their own spin to it? Would it make me feel bad if my pitch got interrupted, or if I was speaking and everyone was on their phone? Well, if that's how it would make you feel, it stands to reason that it might make others feel similarly, right? So let's try to be empathetic about our actions towards each other. Another great way to foster a positive communication culture is active listening. And the next few points will cover ways that you can do this. So firstly, we want to pay attention to each other. I know we all have so many distractions on our computers and our phones, but it is critical to pay attention to each other. Half listening can create miscommunications, cause information to require repeating, and worst of all, makes the presenter feel like people don't care what they have to say. And then don't interrupt each other. Let them finish their thought before jumping in. If you get ahead of things, you may be missing critical pieces of information or context that haven't yet been shared. Try to fully understand before you share your perspective. And I totally get it. Sometimes I'm so excited and I can't help it and I will interrupt with my own idea. It's cool if you do that. However, make sure to circle back to the original point that you interrupted and let them finish their thought. Another thing that we can do is reflect back what we've heard. So you can paraphrase back what the speaker has said to you to ensure that you're understanding correctly. And this gives them an opportunity to correct or adjust if there are any misunderstandings. And so there's a diagram here that illustrates this back and forth between the two speakers, with small corrections as they talk, to ensure that they have a shared understanding of what the other is saying. So you can repeat these reflections as many times as needed until you are both on the same page. And this is a great way to make sure that you are not miscommunicating. And then one more thing that we can do is ask clarifying questions to each other. Let's try to make sure that we are really understanding what's being said before we draw a conclusion. Even if you really disagree, hear their perspective and ask genuine questions to better understand. We have all been there when someone hits you with the feedback that feels like they didn't listen to what you said at all, and it really sucks. But we take deep breaths, and let's still meet them where they're at and meet them with some empathy. You can give them a better chance to explain themselves, something like, can you help me better understand how you feel like that might help us achieve the goals that we agreed upon together? Or even just, can you walk me through that one more time? With active listening, we can avoid the frustrating spiral of miscommunications and misunderstandings that can damage our meeting energy. When we really show each other that we're actively listening and processing the ideas that are being shared, it shows respect, it shows empathy, and it shows that we are all on the same team. So I have a quick story time. Once, I had a teammate suggest that we should add a grappling hook to our pensive cinematic platformer. And internally, I was fuming. What the hell are you on about? That does not fit with what we're doing. But instead of retaliating or ignoring it, I tried to understand, where is that feedback coming from? So I asked them to explain it to me. I'd love your help understanding how this suggestion might help us get closer to our set design goals. And I asked it with sincerity, because venom has no place in a design meeting. And it might feel like a waste of time. It might feel like such an obviously inappropriate idea for what's being discussed. But once again, these meetings are extremely fragile. Demonstrate empathy, demonstrate a genuine interest in understanding, and you might wind up with something valuable. And in the example that I just shared, after getting to the bottom of it, we determined that the feedback was coming from a desire for more excitement in our gameplay. And this wound up being a valid piece of feedback that we were able to adapt into a design choice that was more appropriate for the theme that we were doing. So how does this help psychological safety? Well, it creates safety for new and bold ideas. Feeling heard helps us feel that our ideas are being appropriately considered for what they are, which makes it easier to pitch bold things without fear of judgment or dismissal. It also creates safety for honesty and debate. Speaking empathetically doesn't mean you shouldn't speak with candor or critique, and in fact, it's quite the opposite. It creates safety to speak honestly, have challenging creative disagreements, and to give critical feedback. And when we feel that our peers value our ideas and are truly trying to understand us, it makes these productive, hard conversations possible. All right, we're having great meetings now, but we do work with human beings. And so tip number 6 is to remember that we work with humans. Sorry, y'all. We, unfortunately, are fallible humans with needs. We might be hungry, we might be tired, or we've been in back-to-back meetings since 9 a.m., and this can make it hard to bring our best selves to the meeting. And so, let's find structural ways to help meet these needs. One easy thing that you can do is if your meeting is long, put in a break. Breaks let us recenter, gives us a second to go grab some water, get some fresh air, and let us show up with better clarity and focus when we return to the meeting. So for me personally, anything over an hour, I like to give people a short break, such as about 5 minutes at the halfway mark. And I like to make sure that I give people a window of 5 to 10 minutes between meetings so that no one is caught in that back-to-back crush. The next thing that we can do is to honor people's emotions. Sometimes our emotions get the better of us, and that's okay. It's human, and it can be beautiful sometimes. So I like to encourage a culture of communicating that you need a second to regroup, whether it's excusing yourself for a couple minutes before you resume the meeting, or as a runner, calling for a short break when you sense that things are heating up. It is much better to take a minute to honor what you need and recenter rather than power through while emotionally flooded because you might say something that you really regret. Last thing that we can do is to respect people's time. Be mindful of how long your meeting really needs to be, and consider excusing people from the meeting once you have what you need out of them. So for example, maybe I need an artist for my first agenda point, but they're optional for the rest of the meeting. So I can take a second to let them know, and they can get some time back if they want to. So how does this help psychological safety? Well, being honored as a human being, and not just as a worker, can help people feel more valued. And allowing breaks honors human needs and emotions, which can help diffuse tension and allow for better listening and participation when the break is over. And honoring human needs gives people the best chance to show up as their best selves to the meeting, which can create confidence and participation. Okay, we've run a great meeting. Now what? Which leads me to tip number 7, which is to recap our takeaways. So, We just had this great meeting, but what do we do now? Without a recap, you can forget what key decisions were made, you can forget what action items were next, or maybe not realize what the meeting actually accomplished. So how do we solve this? Well, you can recap at the end. Did we answer the question? What are the solutions we came up with? What are other questions we would determine need answering? Who do I need to meet with after this meeting is over? And recapping at the end helps everyone remember, look at all of that work we just did together as a team. Look at how our brainstorming and our disagreements and our riffs turn into these beautiful takeaways. And it's not only great to remind people about what's next to be done, but I think it serves as a small victory lap to everyone who participated. And I always love to think of this as the 1, 2, 3 break moment of the meeting. Also, send a written recap and meeting notes. I like to do this in addition to the recap at the end of the meeting because there's less of that victory lap moment when you just do it in writing. But having a written record of the key takeaways is important and useful to keep the team anchored in what was decided and what to do next. It can also be useful to give a point of contact for any ideas or thoughts that people come up with after the meeting is over. So, how does this improve psychological safety? Well, it helps attendees feel like their contributions were fruitful, heard, and manifested into something actionable, which may make them more likely to contribute in the future. And people know how they're meant to contribute next, which removes uncertainty and removes that fear of consequence. And it shows that the team is aligned on how to move forward, which creates confidence in further contribution. So, in the spirit of that last tip, let's recap what we learned. So, we covered a whole lot of tips. First, we learned to choose a meeting runner to have someone accountable for upholding meeting structure and integrity. Whoa, oops, wait. There we go. Oh, goodness. Okay. Yeah, it's a little squished, but yeah, should be fine. Next, we learned to establish clear goals, to have a clear problem to solve, and to know why we're all together. Then we learned to lighten up, to create playfulness and comfort amongst your attendees. We learned to create space for everyone to hear all of our talents' voices to make better games. We learned to remember that your actions are your culture and to create positive communication culture through intentional listening and speaking. We learned to remember that you work with humans, to treat each other with compassion and grace. And we learned to recap our meeting findings. We want to remember what we learned and feel empowered to go forth and do great things. And all of these tips help to create a psychologically safe environment, which will help you get the best out of your meetings and your attendees. And if you implement even just one of these tips, your meetings will be better for it. If you like this info and want to learn more, here are some books that have great information about different areas of communication, conflict resolution, creating understanding, etc. And I wanted to take a second too. I saw a fabulous talk right before mine that was about cultural differences in communication. And so, disclaimer too, that many of these tips come from my very Western view of running meetings, so take with a grain of salt. But the Culture Map's a great book to sort of learn those differences in communication and culture. But yeah, great books here, highly recommend all of them. And then, just as a quick final note as well, every team is different, and it's important to learn and understand the needs and preferences of your unique people. But I hope that these tools can provide a good framework for areas to assess. And if you happen to want any help in improving your team's meeting culture, my new studio, SunGhost, offers meeting culture consulting, so drop me a line. Thank you so much for coming to my talk. Cool. We've got quite a bit of time for Q&A if there's any questions. Otherwise, I'll just boogie up here. Any questions? Okay, cool. There's two here.
Any tips on confidence as the young woman in the meeting?
I love this question. So the question was, any tips on confidence as a young woman in the meeting? I do think if you can find your allies, I think that's really helpful. But I think also there's knowing your worth, which is easier said than done. But if you're in that meeting, you're there for a reason, right? And I know that that can be hard to internalize. It took me years to internalize it myself. But I think that trying to really anchor yourself, trying to fight the imposter syndrome as much as you can, and finding the allies in the meeting to help lift you up. And it's okay if that wavers, because it's really hard. It's hard to try to feel empowered to make your voice heard in that environment. But yeah, talk to me after. I've got more tips for you. But yeah, cool. I think there was a question right in front of you.
How does this like scale? Like, is there a point where you have too many that some of the tips doesn't work, or
Like in terms of the meeting size? Yeah, I mean, and I think too, like the tips here are they're great for craft meetings, you know, like when you're having something that's very creatively focused, that has a clear creative output. I think that if you're doing something like an all-hands meeting where there's hundreds of people, some of these may not apply as much. But I do think that there are still ones that are always going to be relevant, like making sure that there's a clear agenda, making sure that you have someone that's running it. Yeah, but I think that many of these tips can be applied well to most craft meetings, I'd say. And yeah, I don't know if I have like an exact number on which they would sort of start to not work as well, but I hope that helps. Yeah. One over there.
If you have someone in the meeting who seems to enjoy sitting back and not really contributing much at all, does that say more about how the meeting is being run, or does that kind of say more about the person and what they just enjoy being like in a meeting?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I do think that some people lean quiet, and that's not out of fear. That's just like who they are. And the sort of forum of bringing up ideas within the meeting might not be the most comfortable. Or in one of the points that I sort of mentioned as well, having that point of contact for them to reach out to when the meeting is over, if they are taking more of that listening role, and like while the meeting is happening, chewing on the ideas, wanting to be thoughtful about how they contribute. I think that it's still good to try out creating those runways, or even talking to them one-on-one if it feels appropriate, and being like, hey, like, you know, you're not in trouble or anything, but I noticed you've been pretty quiet in meetings. Like, is that something you prefer? Can I help empower you to speak up more in them, and just have a really candid conversation about it? But yeah, I think that quietness doesn't necessarily indicate that the meeting is being poorly run. But I think that if you're uncertain, I think that having candid chats with those people can be good. Trying those things out. But yeah, and then even trying, seeing if creating those extra vehicles for being able to contribute things after the meeting or before the meeting, depending, like, you know, very team to team sort of thing. But if it's like, if you want to be like, if you have things you'd like to discuss in this meeting, you can send me a message or fill out this form, and then we'll make sure that we bring it up in there. But yeah, so there's different methods to sort of try and get the ideas out of those people. But yeah, I hope that helps. There's one there.
Really great talk. I really like how you laid all the points out very clearly.
Thank you.
I have a question about when you're in a meeting and you have maybe a stakeholder there, and they kind of are higher up in the hierarchy, and whatever they say carries a lot of weight. And if something emerges, like there is this new piece of information that you didn't know about previously, or something happens that throws the entire agenda off, how do you adapt? Like, do you just call it there and regroup later, or is it better to just go with the flow and see how it evolves?
I love this question because it's very real. Sometimes, you know, if the game director comes in and decides to talk about something completely different, then like, what do you do? I think that it depends on like who you are in the meeting. If you were the one that was called to run the meeting, you know, or if you're a lead, if you're a producer, whatever, and depending on your relationship with that person, maybe you can try to corral it back and be like, ooh, I love this energy. I love these ideas. Awesome. Like, let's talk about it later. I'd really love to make sure that we can answer these questions at hand, though. Is that cool? All right, sweet. Let's pivot back. But if you try that and it doesn't work, and, you know, there's a sort of continuous, I think that, like, there's a lot of, when you're running it, being adaptable is good. And like, it's okay if you wind up needing to schedule a follow-up meeting, being like, hey, we actually didn't answer the questions that came up here. But, if someone who's a big stakeholder co-opted the meeting, everyone will understand. But I think that it's still worth trying to wrangle it back. But you can still approach it by honoring the creative energy that they're bringing, honoring what they might want to be saying, being like, cool, yeah, I'd love to schedule a follow-up meeting about exactly what you're talking about. This is really awesome. Let's chat later, sweet. All right, let's steer it back. But yeah, I don't think you would need to stop it at any point. I'd say finish the hour or whatever, either in trying to redirect it, or if it feels like, okay, let's just roll with whatever they've sort of brought up, then going forth with that. And I think too, the best way to help get those things back in check, something that I like to do, having the agenda, having the goals is so we agree, everyone, we agree these are the goals of the meeting, right? Okay, cool. Let's do it. And then if things start to deviate and be like, oh, that's really awesome. Can you help me understand how those are serving the goals that we all agreed upon at the beginning of this meeting? Okay, cool. So I think that can be a way to sort of approach it. And then something like, oh yeah, you're right. Sorry, let's talk about it later. But if it's really important, then be like, no, actually, let's talk about this now. But then they're, drawing that line. But yeah, I hope that helps. Cool. Any more? There's one here. Oh my gosh, there's one there too. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the talk. Some of the meetings I encounter are sort of like recurring catch-all meetings where we have a team over here and a team that sits in another part of the studio, and they should probably be talking, so we'll have a weekly or a fortnightly sync to make sure they're in communication with each other. Mm-hmm. But we don't really know what's going to happen in that fortnight, whether there'll be an agenda, whether anything will be worth talking about. But an hour gets booked in everyone's calendar every week. Mm-hmm. Do you have thoughts about how to, whether you should do that or not? And if you're going to, are there different rules or principles you'd apply more or less than in the general case you've been describing?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that I know precisely the vibe of meeting that you're talking about was does anyone have anything this week? Maybe. I think that logistically, sometimes just booking that hour, because you never know what people's schedules are going to be like. I think holding that time can still be valuable. But I do think that really checking in, either as the runner or the producer or whatever, it's do people have things to show? And you could go about it a couple different ways. You could either be you must show something, show whatever, at whatever sort of completion rate so that we can talk about it. But I think that what I'd sort of get to the bottom of is, why do we do this sync? Is it to see the progress, whatever, no matter the level across the teams? Is it to bring up issues? Is it to give each other feedback? And getting really clear on what those more specific goals out of why do we want these teams to talk to each other? And then that can help sort of orient you to is this something that we want to make sure that we are in fact talking for this hour every fortnight, and that people are just going to do progress updates? Or is this something where it's an as needed sort of feedback cycle between people, and then if there's nothing to show, then we skip it? But so yeah, I'd get really clear on that. But I think that many of the things can still apply. I think especially the clarity of goals on that one. I think that sometimes in meetings like that, what I've noticed is they're a perfect candidate for cool, so we're all here. What are we doing? How was everyone's weekend? And those could still have value, but I think that being able to come in and be great, so we're this person from this department was going to show this, and they had these questions about it, and this person wanted to check in on the progress of how this tool is being, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But being able to open with those things, even having one or two agenda items, I find with those can also inspire other people to be you know what, actually, I would love to show something this week. And then it can sort of continue to spin up. But yeah, so I feel there's a bunch of ways you could approach it depending on what specifically you want out of that sync. But yeah, I hope that's helpful. Yeah. Cool. There's one back there.
Thank you.
So, I mean, I'm sure many of us have been in meetings that have gone really well, the vibe's really good in the room, but then there's been other meetings that maybe by the end of it, it sort of hasn't landed. You know, you can feel it in the room, the emotional energy and that kind of thing. I'm curious to know, what's your approach after one of those meetings that hasn't landed to kind of check into the team and to sort of, I suppose, reorient where you go from there and how you want to run other meetings?
Yeah, and when you say hasn't landed, like, and just you didn't get to where you wanted to be, or like maybe it was a little tense, like...
Yeah, either of those really.
Okay, yeah, I can speak to both. I think that, like, if it ended on a tense note, I think that depending on the nature of the conflict, you can give it some time, let everyone cool off a little bit, and then if you were the runner or if you're the producer, if it's a role that feels appropriate to do so, you can maybe just check in casually with some of the people that might have been in the heaviness of the tension. Be like, hey, just wanted to check in. I know things got a little spicy in there. Or, you know, you don't even need to call it out that specifically. You can just be like, I'd love to hear your thoughts about the meeting that we just had, and then giving them a safe avenue to speak with you as the meeting runner in a one-on-one capacity where they may feel more vulnerable or able to sort of share some of their feelings about how things went down, maybe some good feedback on like, oh, the structure of the meeting I feel like maybe put me into a weird position that created this conflict. But so I think that can be one way of approaching it. Or, you know, it can just sort of like look for those patterns that happened in the meeting and then just make sure, like, okay, when we run our next one, whatever it is, like if we're doing another craft meeting about this particular thing, here's what I as the runner am going to change to try to avoid this or to try to like smooth things over. But yeah, I think that like sometimes you don't necessarily need to intervene. It can just be, you know, designers fight all the time. But I think that like, use your best judgment on like, is this something that I should really like, you know, try to vibe check on, or is this something that we can just like smooth over with time? But as for things with the sort of meeting where like you did it and you did not hit the goals, or it went on a totally different tangent, I think that you can book another one as a simple thing. But I think it's okay to be honest about like, hey, I think there were some outstanding goals in our last meeting that we didn't get to. And I think it's really important that we can get really clear on X, Y, and Z, and then we can move forward with that. So, and because I think that kind of like, you know, everyone taking accountability for that, where it's like, it's not just the runner's fault, like everyone contributed to not reaching those goals, right? And being able to, everyone sort of like shared, no one's at fault. It's just like that we're people, we might get off track. And so it's like, hey, let's get back together, let's do this. And then I think that even framing it with that type of ownership of how we maybe didn't achieve what we want can help me be like, yeah, you're right. Okay, like let's focus in a little bit more. Yeah, and I think that, you know, you can either do that, you can either sort of make those statements like in the follow-up, or like, you know, you can send a little Slack message, depending on how many people it is too, I think would inform how you might communicate that. But yeah, that's kind of how I'd go about those things. There's one there.
Kia ora. That was a great talk.
Thanks.
So about one of the earlier questions about being a young woman, and your answer was seek an ally. On the other side of the coin, you know, if you have privilege, how would that ally should look? How do you wish people were being an ally for you?
Okay, can you repeat the question actually? Or sorry, yeah, it's a little quiet, yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're all good.
So one of the earlier questions was, as a young woman, you know, your answer was seek an ally. So on the other side of the coin, you know, if you have privilege, how would you be an ally? What would you wish you saw as being an ally to you?
Oh, okay, just to make sure I understand that it's like if you are in like a privileged position, like sort of how you can better show up in the meeting. Okay, cool. I love this question too. I think that that's a great place to be someone to be noticing the patterns a lot and like noticing. I think a great way to be a strong ally in that case is to like, interruptions are big, especially with like AFAB people. And so noticing when someone gets interrupted and being able to be that person, no matter who you are. You don't need to be the runner to do this. Be like, hey, I don't think they got to finish that thought. before we move on, can we go back to that and make sure that they can finish? And if the people in your meeting are cool, they're gonna be like, oh yes, of course, so sorry. And then you can go back and sort of finish that. But I think that's a really easy way to do, anyone can do that. I think it carries more weight, of course, like if you are the runner, but I've done that when I'm just like an IC and a peer in a meeting and I'm noticing people getting interrupted. I think also like the creating those avenues for people to contribute, like those like low pressure, okay, I've got 5 minutes left. Those low pressure avenues for people to contribute to the conversation, where like if you've noticed they've been really quiet throughout the whole thing, and you might even know that they had something they wanted to say in this meeting, but like I know especially in design meetings, sometimes getting a word in is insane. Just like, and so being able to, if you have a voice of privilege, if you have an easier time getting into that craziness, being like, hey, you know, we haven't heard from so-and-so, and you can even, you know, depending on how close you are with the person too, like I've done something with friends of mine that I know are really shy, where like, I'll give them a look, and they'll give me a look, and I'm like, okay, cool, let me carve out some space for you right now. So, you know, there's different shades of that, but I think that very much like noticing the patterns, challenging the patterns, I think that those are big. And then, and even if you're not super tight with them, like, you know, I think that being able to notice when someone might need an ally and be like, hey, like, can I, like, would it be helpful if I sort of helped carve you some space in the meetings? I know it can be really hard to get a word in. And they might be like, oh, no, that's okay, thanks. Or they might be like, oh, that would be great, thank you. And so, yeah, I think that like showing up with vulnerability and sincerity in that way too is good. But yeah, great question. Cool. I maybe have time for like one more. Yeah. Cool.
Kia ora, nice talk. I was wondering if you had any thoughts or tips for people who are not running the meeting but participating, and maybe the runners aren't here and they don't get these tips. How do you bring these ideas, like suggestions and ideas to...
Totally. I mean, I think the good news is that you can actually apply a lot of these even just as an attendee. I think that like, and you know, of course there's stuff where it's like maybe as an attendee, you don't have as much power over the goal setting, but being able to, you know, I've definitely been that girl where it's not my meeting and I'm like, what are the goals of this meeting? Because if they don't have that, how embarrassing, like why'd they bring us here? And so I think that like, you know, approaching with curiosity, and like, cause I think that, yeah, you know, being able to ask things like, oh, like, I want to make sure so that I can show up, like I can participate the most meaningfully. Can someone run me through what the goals of this meeting are? Or I've straight up asked, who's running this meeting right now? And if it's no one, then it's like, okay, that like, you know, paints a picture for what to expect. And then I think that, yeah, you know, things like injecting levity into the conversation. Like if you know, you can be the first one to be like, I just played a really cool game this weekend, blah, 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 blah. And then like go forth on that. And then of course, to like the previous question that I had, being able to like show up as an ally, recognizing the imbalances and sort of power and communication and trying to help reconcile those things. But yeah, I think that like many of these are still applicable. And then I think that you can sort of gently encourage some of these things through curiosity, you know, and talking to the people that are running the meeting. You don't need to be like, hey, you're not doing X, Y, Z, but like you can just, my Americanness is showing, sorry. But yeah, you can just sort of, you know, you can even be like, I saw this really cool talk and there was this thing that I liked in it. It might be cool to implement. What do you think? But yeah, cool. I think that's it, but I'll be around. So if there's any more questions, if you want to talk about meetings, being a good ally, all that good stuff, don't be a stranger. But yeah, thank you.